thanks to everyone who's joined us so far. Typically we wouldn't have one of these things going on a Friday night in the middle of December, but safe to assume many of us aren't out at Christmas and family functions as we typically would right around this time. So we may as well do something fun and enjoyable, and learn a few tricks at the same time. So tonight we got Brent Bochek from Fish NV Guiding Service, and Brent also now this season has kicked off a TV series called Set the Hook TV, which he'll explain how you can access that in a little bit, but it's through Cogeco. And we got Shane Toms as well if we need him for any technical support. So if anyone has any questions at any time, you can send me a message. There's the chat function here, or you can maybe raise your hand either way, and then I'll unmute you. And then when the time is right, you can ask your question, and we'll certainly have Brent answer it. So
yeah, I encourage questions too. It really makes it a lot more interactive when people ask questions.
Yeah, definitely. So we're want to try and share and help people learn. So there was just from my experience in the shop the last few months, there seemed to be a growing enthusiasm for people getting into musky fishing who kind of hadn't for some time. Whether it's up north at their cottages or on a vacation, or locally here at the Niagara River, or those making the trip out to Lake St. Clair. So Brent's going to try and touch on a little bit of that, a little bit of everything to get people in the right position to get some success. So without further ado, we're going to give it to Brent now, and let's have some fun.
All right, thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Really appreciate yourself and Martin at Grimsby Tackle for hosting this. I don't know, is it mine? I don't know if you can see the big screen with I'm on there or how that works or whatever, but there we go.
Just to for those who, if this is their first time using Zoom, there are different ways as you kind of toggle on your sidebars or on the bottom how you can adjust the format of your screen. So there should be a way for you people to make Brent as your large screen, so you get the best viewing enjoyment.
All righty, click. Shane says, click on view and select speaker view. There we go. Okay, so as Mark said, I thank Mark and Martin at Grimsby Tackle for having me on to talk muskie today. I do a lot of fishing seminars throughout the winter at the Hamilton Boat Fishing Outdoor Show, the Newberry Show, the Toronto Boat Show, and then some club meetings as well. And that I really enjoy doing the seminars. This year is going to be a lot different because we're not going to have these boat shows. We're not going to have our sportsman shows, unfortunately. Hopefully 2021 we'll be back into that. But this is a great way for us as anglers to get together, talk to each other, and share some ideas. So as Mark was saying, I have a guide service called Fish Envy. Was a multi-species guide service, but we've kind of narrowed it down to salmon and trout in Lake Ontario, and then muskie fishing up in the Kawartha Lakes. I'm kind of getting away from the bass and the walleye stuff. It just gets to be a little too much. So we're just we'll be doing muskie June, taking July off from muskie, and then back August, September, October, November for the muskie stuff. I've been doing the guiding stuff for about 10 years again. I did it years ago. I have a 19-foot low that we fish out of for that. And then the salmon stuff on Lake Ontario, we're fishing out of a 25.5-foot Sea Ray Amberjack. So there's a lot of room in that. It's a lot of fun. Mark mentioned about the TV series that we just started called Setting the Hook. And that's on Cogeco Niagara on Saturdays at 9:30. And then it's also on Cable 14 in Hamilton, Haldeman area. And that's on Sundays at 1:30 p.m. Now, if you're not in either one of those viewing areas, you don't have cable, you can also go into cable14.com on Saturdays at 1:30, and you can catch the live feed right off your computer there while it's on. So far, we've done a salmon show, we've done a couple bass shows. 90% of the filming's got to be done in the Niagara area. So we did take a trip down to Ottawa and fish with a friend of mine, John Anderson, and one of his guides, Lisa Goodyear, and we fished the Ottawa River back in October, and we got some really nice fish down there, and that show should be out in January. All these shows also eventually will be on our Setting the Hook YouTube page. We just got a couple little trailers on there right now. So if you can go over to our YouTube page, I think it's Setting the Hook with Brent Bochek, and subscribe, and you'll get all those updates as they start to come on. So, okay, let's.
We just had a few people join in the last couple of minutes, Brent. So just a quick refresher as we get started here. If anyone has any questions at any time, you can use the chat feature there, and I'll catch it there. Or if your video is on, you can raise your hand if you have a question, then we'll unmute you. Or you can send your question in via the chat function. So we encourage questions throughout the evening. It makes it enjoyable, and trying to all learn as much as possible.
Yeah, the more questions, the better. I really enjoy that part of the presentation. So let's see if I can do this right here. Slide one. Just got to put the tape down here so I can see what we're doing. If that looks a little goofy, that work? No. Oh, we got to get. There we go. Oh, hold on. I got to put a little more tape on here. This is our first time, or my first time doing something like this on Zoom. So just, I apologize. Just bear with me a little bit, and we'll make sure this goes off without a hitch once we a little more tape. Where'd my what happened there?
Just click on none and then go back in again and click on your picture.
There we go.
There you go.
Shane, thank you very much. Also, thanks to Shane for being here to kind of walk us through this. This technical stuff is definitely not one of my strong points. So appreciate that, Shane. So are these slides backwards?
Nope, they're right.
Right. Okay, so I'm seeing them backwards, but if they're right for you, that's all that matters. So what's kind of a Musky 101 presentation we're going to do today? I'll go back and forth where you can see me sometimes. You can see the slide. We're going to go over rods, reels, line, leaders, baits, techniques, landing, handling, and release techniques as well. Is that pretty good? I'm reading those all backwards. So the first thing we're going to look at is rods. When you're musky fishing, we're using a lot heavier action rod than what we're using when we're bass or walleye fishing. And there's a number of reasons for that. One of the reasons is to throw some of these big baits that we have. A lot of these big baits we have, we need heavier rods. Oh, how do I just go back to none, Shane? There we go. So it's a great big swim bait here. This one's made as a curly Sue. It probably weigh, I haven't weighed this, but it's probably at least half a pound, if maybe a little bit more. Throwing those big baits, throwing big Suiks like this here, you're gonna need a heavier rod. So a heavier rod, heavier action. If you're throwing these baits with a lighter rod, with a bass rod or whatever, you're not gonna be able to work the bait the way you wanna be able to work it. So the heavier rod's not only for landing the fish, but it's also for working your baits properly. If you're throwing a bass or a walleye rod, you're not going to get that proper hook set. You're not going to have the backbone on these big baits to get that proper hook set when you do hook up with a fish. So a heavy rod, well balanced, very important. Now you notice on that, when I had that photo up there, not a lot of room in this room here, but they got a lot longer handle on them here. You want a long handle like this for two-handed casting. You're going to have one hand at the butt of the rod, one up on the reel. I apologize, there's not a lot of room here, but so one hand on the butt of the rod, one on the reel, and you got almost like a catapult with those baits. So that the action on the rod is very important. If I'm throwing a really heavy bait, I'm going to want a bit of a stiffer rod so that when I come back and I'm throwing that bait, I don't have to work physically hard myself. I can use that action in the rod to help throw that bait forward. If I'm throwing something a little bit lighter, like some blades here, we'll get into these a little bit, but blades, a little bit lighter, I'm going to want a rod that has a little bit more action on it. It's a little bit lighter rod. I still like a fast tip, but the action is a little bit lighter. So when I come back, my rod's actually going to load up. We'll see a picture here. I'm going to go back to another picture. There we go. Now you see the way that rod is loaded up here? I got my one hand at the bottom of the rod, the other one up on the reel. I got my thumb on the spool. But see how that rod is loaded up? The bend in the rod, it starts right about there. I got a bit of line, then I got a leader. So all that action, all I have to do is come back. I haven't brought my arms way back there. I've only brought my arms back a little bit. They're still in front of me. I'm letting that weight of the lure load up that rod, and we're using that action in the rod to help cast the bait. Let's go back to none. There we go. So what you're doing there is you're coming back a little bit, letting that rod load up to throw that bait out. What you don't want to be doing when you're musky fishing, when you're throwing these big heavy baits, is bringing your arms way back here with your rod and working hard to throw your baits. What's going to happen is by the end of the day, you're going to be really tired. You're going to have sore shoulders, a sore back. So it's very important having the proper rods to have the proper action in them for the baits that you're using to help conserve your energy, so that when you do get a fish following, you do get a fish on, that you're in top game, you're not fatigued, you're ready to go. So when we're talking reels, we're talking bait casting reels. Never when I'm musky fishing am I using a spinning reel. Always using a bait casting reel. If you haven't used a bait casting reel before, don't be intimidated by them. When you're bass fishing, you're using a lot smaller reel, you're using a lot lighter line. When you're musky fishing, you're using that little bit bigger reel, and you're also using heavier line on them. You don't get the same backlash with the heavy line that you do with the lighter line. Another thing is, if you do get a backlash with that heavier line, I like to use 80 or 100 pound test. Usually I like 80 pound test, Berkeley braid, the X9. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I like that heavy braid. When you do get a backlash, it's easier to get out. When I'm guiding for musky, I have a lot of clients in the boat who have never used a bait caster before. Yes, we do get a few backlashes, and they're not a big deal to get out. Now, depending on what kind of baits I'm throwing, I'm using two different gear ratios. If I'm throwing something like jerk baits where I want to pick the line up really quickly, I'm going to be using a high gear ratio, like a 6.3 to 1. For example, on the Revo Toro Beast by Abu Garcia, it's 31 inches of line pickup per turn of the handle. If I'm throwing blades, like double 10s or double 8s, and we'll go over the blades in a few minutes here as well, then I'm going to be throwing something with a lower gear ratio, like a 4.6 to 1. And that's going to give me approximately 27 inches of turn per every time I turn that handle. That lower gear ratio allows you to throw those big blades which have a lot of resistance, or if you're throwing big crankbaits, which have a lot of resistance, allows you to work those through the water easily. If I'm using a high gear ratio when I'm throwing those blades, I'm going to be working really hard. So it's just like the gears in your car. If you're pulling the boat out of the water, you don't go and put your car in 5th gear. You got it in 1st gear when you're pulling it out. Same idea. So when you're pulling a bait that's really heavy, got a lot of drag to it, drop down to a lower gear ratio. When I'm pulling a jerk bait, when I want to pick up that slack line real quick, then we're going to be using something with a higher gear ratio. Years ago, when I first started musky fishing, we used a lot of not a lot of monofilament, but we used a lot of Dacron line, which had about probably 15% stretch. We kind of thought that was pretty much no stretch line at the time until these super braids came out. Monofilament, you have probably 30% stretch. Dacron about 15%. Now, braided line, you have approximately 1% stretch. Maybe some lines you might have up to 3%, but I don't think you have any more than that. So if you look at here, I got the X5. You got one carrier. You got the core, and you got 4 carriers on it. And then the X9, you have 1 core, and you have 8 carriers. So for musky fishing, I want my line a little bit limber. I'm using the X9, and the reason for that is those 9 carriers there are actually they're smaller, and they're actually more limber. Where on the X5, they're a little stiffer. If you're flipping for bass or pitching or whatever, you might want to go with something like the X5. But musky fishing, I like the X9. It handles real well. One of the big things with braid is it's a very strong line, but it will break down on you. Anytime you start to get fray in your line, water will absorb into it, and then that'll start to break your braid down. So it's very important when you go, especially on beginning of a trip, first thing in the morning, maybe take a few feet of line off, check it periodically throughout the day. Make sure you don't have fray in your line. The first few feet of your line, you're banging rocks, you're banging wood, you're banging into weeds and whatnot. You get a fish rolling up at it after you've caught a fish. You will start to get fray on it, no matter what kind of braid you're using. Make sure you get a little bit of fray on there, cut it off, retie, and you won't have any problems at all. Leaders. I probably 90% of my fishing for musky is casting. So I'm using anywhere from a 9 to 15-inch leader. That might say 12 on there, but now that I've started throwing some of these big 14-inch Frankensuiks, I've started making some of my own leaders that are a little bit longer. Trolling, I'll go up to about a 48-inch leader. And one of the reasons for that is, there's a couple reasons. One, when I'm trolling, I want to be, especially if it's in the summertime, like August or September, I want to be banging structure. I want to be trolling out of deep water, up into shallower water. So that longer leader, instead of my line hitting the rocks as I come up on a shoal, the steel leader is going to be hitting the line, hitting the rocks as I come up onto a shoal there. So I get a lot of abrasion on the leader. I don't want that out of my line, so I use a longer leader there. Another reason when I'm trolling, I'm going to use a 48-inch leader, is if you get a big fish on and he rolls up in that leader, I don't want him rolling up on the line. I want him, if he is going to roll up on you, I want it to be on the leader so I don't get the line in between in the gills or gill plate and get cut off. When you're trolling, sometimes muskies do roll up in the line on you. When you're casting, very rarely does that ever happen. So let me just show you a couple of things I'd like to do with leaders here. So I have a couple, oops, got some stuff here. When I buy my leaders, these ones are made by Suick as well. It's a solid steel leader. When I'm throwing jerkbaits, I like a solid leader. Actually, I almost always use a solid leader. The only time I don't use solid leaders is when I'm throwing big rubber swim baits. So one of the things you notice on this leader is, see the snap there, how it's dangling? If I put it on a bait here, just put it on this bait real quick. When I cast it out and it's tumbling through the air, there is a chance the way that swivels, it can get caught on the hooks. One of the things I really stress is making every cast count. When you're musky fishing, I don't know how many casts you make in a day. We tried counting once and we got lost on it, but we got sidetracked. But you know, you might be out there 8, 10, 12 hours a day fishing. You may be looking for one fish that whole day, and it could be a big fish. I don't want to make that perfect cast in the perfect spot where that big fish is sitting and have something happen to my leader get caught up on the hooks. So what I've done is, on my jerkbait leaders in particular, taking a little piece of heat shrink. You can get this at, I don't know if you guys carry any heat shrink at Grimsby Tackle or not, Mark. If they do, go in and ask for it. If not, a hardware store, Canadian Tire will carry it, I know. If you can get your local tackle shop, that's even better. But now see that the snap here, there's no swivel on it. It doesn't swivel. So I'm going to put it back on this bait. Now when I'm fishing that perfect weed edge or that rock pile, and there's a big fish sitting there, the moon phase is right, put that cast in the perfect spot, there's no way that is going to get caught on your hooks. See how it makes it stiff there? There's no way. It's going to be pretty difficult for that to get caught on your hooks in any way, shape, or form, no matter what you do with it. So that's just one little trick, one little thing I like to do with my leaders. Like I said, musky have very, very sharp teeth. They're like razor blades. They're sharp on both sides. Pike also. Walleye have sharp teeth, but they're pointy. They're like a cone. They're not sharp on the side, so you don't need a leader when you're walleye fishing, obviously. But musky fishing, don't go musky fishing without a steel leader. You can use fluorocarbon leaders as well. I got a few here that I make up myself. So that one's about 14, 15 inches. Actually, it's about 16 inches at 4 carbon leader there. And what I'm going to use a fluorocarbon leader is when I'm throwing big rubber baits like this. If my hooks get caught up on the leader and I'm using a stiff wire jerkbait leader, like these ones here that we were just talking about, what's going to happen is you're going to pull that bait through the water. It's going to kink these leaders. They're going to be all out of whack. They're going to be no good in it. They're going to be no good afterwards. The big fluorocarbon leaders, you know, you can tie these in a knot and they're still going to be fine. So what you're not going to kink up the fluorocarbon leaders. I like to have the leader a little bit longer than what the bait is itself. This bait here from the nose here to where my fingers are is about 9 inches. And then you got the tail. So the most of the bait here is 9 inches long. So make sure you use a fluorocarbon leader when you're throwing big rubbers. That's the one time I will. I do make my own leaders every now and then out of downrigger cable. I will use a leader like this as well on rubber sometimes, but the best one is fluorocarbon. Any other time I'm using a steel leader. Okay, let's go. What we got here? Let's talk about baits.
Hey, Brent, we have a question.
Yes.
What pound test fluoro are you using? And is there a lot of stretch with it?
I don't, you know, this leader here is about 14 inches, for example. So if there's any stretch in it, it's going to be so minimum that we wouldn't even notice it. Pound test, I think it's 175 pound test. I wouldn't go anything less than 125 pound test. I want it to have some substance to it. I still, with Musky's teeth being as sharp as they are, anything lighter, I'm still skeptical whether they might be able to bite through it if they took a bait. When a muskie grabs a bait, it likes to grab it by the head. And right by the head of the bait is where your leader attaches. Most of our fish are caught on that front hook. So I want to make sure that my leader is going to take up, it's going to stand up to any fish biting on it. Not that he's going to try to bite the leader. He doesn't know what it is, but it's just something when it comes across his teeth or whatever. I've never had a fish bite through a fluoro leader. I still prefer wire leaders, a solid wire leader, but if you're using fluoro, at least 175 pound test. And I just, there we go. These are just crimped on with, I think they're crimps from a downrigger cable. So anybody that doesn't have any salmon fishing should have extra downrigger cable hanging around, and you're going to have a bunch of crimps for it. And yeah, you make up your own leaders there. I know at the store there, you got snaps, you got swivels, and you got crimps. So you can go in and you guys have big things of fluoro there, Mark?
Yes, we do. We got lots of various Seaguar fluoro. And
Okay.
we have 3 different tests. I think we have 120, 25, and 150.
Okay, yeah. So I would recommend the 150 out of that. The 125 will work, but I would still, myself, I'd go with 150. Get yourself a pair of Staycon pliers, and you crimp those on. And I've started to make my own pliers, my own leaders recently. And touch wood, I've never had one fail. Okay. Let's go. Let's look at a few baits here. So when I'm musky fishing, like for example in the Kawarthas, these are the 3 baits that I'll use for the most part. I'm going to be throwing blades. These are handlebar blades on the, I believe on your right. In the middle is a big swim bait. That's a Susie sucker, and then a Suic thriller on the left side. I've thrown a lot of jerk baits over the years. I've thrown glide baits, dive and rise baits, all kinds. The Suic are my favorite. They just, for me, I like the cadence that I get with them, and they put a lot of fish in the boat. But there are a lot of different kinds of jerk baits out there that you can use. Let's look at blades to start with here. Let me just go back to none here. I know you've had these in the store before, Mark, and these are handlebars. This is a double 8. And let me just grab a double 10 there for you to show you the size difference. Oops. The skirts were wet, so I had them on the over the vent for the heater. So that's a double 10. It's a little bit longer. The blades are bigger. And there's an 8 side by side. I don't know if you can see a little bit longer. You get a lot more resistance on the 10s. I really believe you'll catch just as many fish on the 8s as you will the 10s. The 10 does give you a bigger profile. Sometimes that makes a difference. Sometimes the speed will make a difference. You can reel the 8s a little bit quicker. Sometimes speeds makes a big difference. One thing when you're throwing blades like this, what I like to do is when I cast it out, before it hits the water, I'm going to stop my spool with my thumb. So remember, I got my one hand on the reel, one at the butt of the rod. I cast it out. Before it hits the water, I want to stop it. That throws everything back. As soon as it hits the water, I want to get those blades spinning. As soon as it hits the water, you make a cast, this bait hits the water and it starts to flutter down. It's going to look very unnatural. A lot of times when you're musky fishing, you'll catch a fish in the first 10 feet of the cast or the last 10 feet of a cast. So what I want to do is I want this to hit the water and I want those blades to start spinning right away. If this bait hits the water and there's a fish close by and those blades are spinning, I believe when the bait hits the water, if there's a fish close by, he hears it. He's going to take a look at it. He's going to say, oh, what's that? They're curious. If we hear a splash out in the lake, we take a look to see what it was, see if it's a fish or a bird. I'm sure muskies are the same way. All fish are probably the same way. So as soon as he sees that bait, I want this to be spinning right away. And out of reaction, an instinct more than hunger, they'll strike that bait. When I'm getting close to the boat, I'm talking about the last 10 feet, I'm watching behind the bait and below the bait all the time. More and more fish I'm starting to catch in my boat or on a figure 8 or a boat side maneuver. So when this bait's coming to the boat, I'm watching, or any bait for that matter, I'm watching behind it and below it. I always tell people to watch a foot behind it and a couple feet, or a foot below it and a couple feet behind your bait. Fish is coming in. I want to keep this bait, the blades moving the whole time. I'm going to come into the boat and I'm going to make a boat side maneuver called a figure 8 or a big circle. So as I come to the boat, I keep my bait in the water and keep reeling. I get within about a couple inches of line before my leader. I'll keep the bait in the water and make a big circle with my bait. Or you can go into a figure 8. If you go into a figure 8, on the end of the 8, you want to be pulling your bait away from the boat, come back towards the boat, and then away from the boat again. A lot of times those fish will hit on the corners. If the fish hits on the corner, I want to be able to set the hook when I'm pulling away from the boat. I don't want that fish to hit the bait and I have nowhere to go with my rod because I'm coming towards the boat with it. What are we looking at next? Big rubber baits. So there's a Susie sucker that we were just looking at in the picture. It's a swim bait. That was about 9 inches long. When I cast this out again, one thing you can do is you can just a straight retrieve. A straight retrieve, you're going to get that tail going back and forth. It's going to throw off a little bit of vibration in the water, and you can catch fish like that. And I'll kind of use that presentation a little bit more when it's cold outside. I'll work it slower when the water temperatures get down into that 55 degrees or so. During the summertime, warm water periods, I'm going to work it like a jerk bait. And when I give this a pull in the water column, because it's made of rubber, it's going to sink. When I give it a pull, it's going to actually rise. And then on that bit of slack line, when I'm reeling it up, it's actually going to take a nosedive like this. So it's going to come up in the water column, then a nosedive, up in the water column, and then another nosedive. Which, if I'm working a suic, a jerk bait like this here, what's going to happen when I give it a pull, it's going to dive down on an angle. And then it's going to rise straight up, dive down and rise straight up. I really like throwing jerk baits. So throwing a jerk bait is great. But when I'm throwing this big swim bait, I can do the exact same thing. Pardon me, I can work my rod the same way and get a different action out of the bait. So it's going to come up and then a straight dive, like an injured bait fish. This is going to dive down and come back up. So imagine most people here fished a lot of walleye over the years. So this here is just a little Berkeley flicker minnow, one of my favorite baits out in Lake Erie. There's a 9-inch musky bait beside it. Now you can see a big difference there, right? This little flicker minnow Great on walleye. I'm not going to use it for musky, obviously, but just to look at a comparison. This is a 9-inch Suick thriller. Over the last couple of years, Suick has came out with a Franken Suick. Now, this may look a little bit, so here's your 9-inch Suick, and there's your Franken Suick. Look how big that thing looks. It looks huge. When I first got these, they looked so big, I was almost intimidated to throw them. Now I look at this 9-inch thriller, I'm thinking it looks kind of small. But if you think about it, this is a 14-inch bait. A muskie will eat on a regular basis a meal a third of its size. So if you're looking to catch a 50-inch muskie, he's going to eat a 17-inch fish, whether it's a sucker or catfish or whatever. No problem at all. So this 14-inch bait really isn't that big. It looks big, especially if you're a bass walleye guy, but to a muskie, it's not that big at all. A muskie is actually capable of eating a meal that's 2/3 its size. So don't be afraid to throw bigger baits, even in the springtime. A lot of guys will talk about fishing in spring. When I say spring, I'm talking June when muskie opens, and they talk about throwing smaller baits, like 6 or 7-inch baits. Maybe something about, that big there. The smaller, or the 9-inch Suick, stuff like that. They're not real big profiles, but a smaller bait. Guys will talk about bait smaller in the spring and stuff like that, especially salmon guys will talk about this bait smaller in the spring. But in order to get those smaller baits, you have to have big bait coming in and reproducing to make those smaller bait. So what happened a few years back is walleye fishing up in the Kawarthas, and I forgot my net for a couple weekends in a hurry to get up north, forgot the net. And we're doing really good fishing walleye, catching a lot of fish. My wife's throwing a twister tail with a jig head, and she gets about a 14, 15-inch walleye boat side. Most of the times you just flip them in. She wanted me to grab it, so I reached down to grab it. And remember, this is about a 14, 15-inch walleye, and about a 40-inch muskie comes up to try to grab that walleye as soon as I'm reaching for it. So one, I almost crapped my drawers. Two, I start counting all my fingers are all there. Then we landed a walleye. Now I'm thinking, everybody talks about downsizing in the spring. There's a 40-inch muskie trying to eat a 15-inch walleye. Well, I did a talk for the Kawartha chapter of Muskies Canada back in early June. Either late May or early June. And I was talking about you don't have to downsize. So a couple weeks later, I think it was the second week of June, I'm out in Lake Erie and we're muskie fishing, and I'm throwing this 14-inch Franken Suick. I think it might have been a perch color. I'm not sure, but anyways, and I hooked up on a real nice fish out there. We landed it, got some nice pictures, and it just kind of reiterated that you don't have to downsize, no matter, even early in the year, you don't have to downsize those baits. The only time I might downsize is when we have a real cold front coming through, or if I've been fishing for a while and there's absolutely no activity. You're not seeing any follows. You're not seeing any activity, even with other animals. If I'm not seeing any birds flying around, no geese or seagulls or anything, you're not hearing any or ducks. You're not hearing any birds chirping. Something's off in the atmosphere, but that's the time I might kind of start to throw something a little bit smaller. I was saying we were fishing up in the Ottawa River a few weeks back, back in October, and I fished with one of John Anderson's guys from the Ottawa River Muskie Factory, Lisa, on the first night. There was a lot of activity. We caught 2 real nice fish. The next, we were only fishing for 4 hours. The next day, John and I are fishing together. We go the whole day. I don't know if we even seen a follow that day, but we put in about 8-9 hours. Didn't land a fish. Didn't see a fish. Second day, it's about 3:30, 3:45, and all of a sudden we hear all this wildlife start going. We hear all these geese are flying overhead, and there's probably a flock of about 400 or 500 geese flew over us, and it's really noisy in the background. And all of a sudden, boom, John gets a nice fish, 41, 42-inch muskie on, and we land that. And I've been watching the video from it because everything was being filmed, and this is what kind of really clued me in. All of a sudden, the world around us came alive. The wildlife was right on the tip of a moon phase, and all of a sudden, the geese are moving. We see some other animals, other birds and whatnot. We catch a fish, and we caught another. We had activity from a couple more fish within the next hour. So that's another thing you really want to pay attention to when you're muskie fishing is moon phases. anytime on my phone, if I can find it here. Oh, oops. I don't know if you can see that, but right there, that's my app, hunting and fishing app. And it'll actually tell me when the moon phases are for your area. So today's not a really good day, but we are coming on to a peak around 10 o'clock tonight. So if you're out walleye fishing tonight, 10 o'clock would probably be a good time. So keep one of these on your phone. I think this app cost me $1.50 for a lifetime membership. It's a hunting and fishing app. Okay, let's just go to Monday there. So Monday Monday's a full moon. And you can see how the activity is a lot higher throughout the day. Instead of being down here, the activity peaks up here, and you have these definite peaks for activity. If I'm fishing anywhere, especially the Kawartha Lakes, when I'm coming onto a peak like that, I want to be on my best spots where I've either seen fish early in the day, spots where I know there's big fish hanging out. If there's a windswept point, especially windswept rocky points, I want to hit those when you got a peak in the moon phase. So that's kind of got a little off topic here. You're talking about a few things, but that's one thing I really pay attention to when you're fishing. Pay attention to what's going on around you, what's going on in the water. As I said, the one time I will downsize is when there's nothing happening at all. But for the most part, I do like throwing bigger baits. I truly believe that a muskie would rather eat one bait, one big meal, than chase around eating a whole bunch of 6-inch perch. If he can eat one 15-inch walleye or a sucker or a moon eye, I'm sure he'd rather do that than chase around eating a half a dozen perch. I kind of put it this way: I'd rather sit down and have a whole chicken than eat a chicken wing, run 100 yards, eat another chicken wing, run 100 yards, eat another chicken wing. You got to really like chicken wings to run 100 yards for each one. So that's kind of why I look at it. Where are we next here? Talking baits. Oops. There we go. So speed can be a key factor when you're musky fishing. When the water gets really, really cold, sometimes you got to slow right down. But in June, August, September, and that, I don't fish a lot of muskie in July because the water just gets too warm and it's very hard on the fish. So we try to stay away from July. But during those warmer water periods, key is a huge factor, can really trigger fish. So I've been musky fishing since I was 18 years old. And that's more than, we'll just say that's a long time ago. And this is the first time I've ever had a double header. So this fella on the right had that fish on, that muskie there, and his buddy that's on your left, he'd had a bit of a tough day. The guy on the right had caught a fish, 1 or 2 fish already. We had a 4-hour trip. I think we had 5 fish up that day. And he gets a fish on, and his buddy who's holding that big tiger muskie there starts reeling in really fast. So what had happened was the guy catches that smaller fish. I grab the net. His buddy's reeling in real fast. Goes, oh, I got one too. What I think happened was him reeling as fast as he could to get his bait out of the water while his buddy was fighting a fish, triggered that big tiger to hit. You cannot outreel a muskie. I don't care how fast you can reel, you cannot outreel them. Well, sometimes we'll even troll. I've seen guys troll up as fast as 7 miles an hour. If I'm trolling in June, August, September, I'll troll up 5 miles an hour. And quite often with baits right behind the boat, 50 feet, 20 to 50 feet behind the boat. And they have no problem catching those baits. So the only time I usually slow down when I'm musky fishing is when the water gets really cold, especially once it gets below 55 degrees or low, then it will slow down. Those fish are still active and feeding, but they don't have as much energy to chase those baits down in that cold water. Then again, when we're outside, when we're cold, we don't want to move that fast either. So that's a slide. That's not, I don't think this next one that won't play. One of the big things is when you're musky fishing is landing fish. We're going to talk about landing fish. Release tools is very important. A long pair of nose pliers, needle nose pliers. I have a couple sets. I have a normal set, and then I have ones that are longer in my boat. some cutters, hook cutters. Those are Nipex hook cutters there. Very important to cut. You want to be able to cut these 5, 6, 7 treble hooks without any problem. The last thing you want to do is start ripping hooks out of a fish when you catch them. So proper handling techniques are essential for the successful release of a fish. You never want to hold a musky vertical, as it can really damage its. I'm reading this backwards. Actually, you guys can read that. I don't need to read it to you. You can see that slide there. So when you hold a fish vertical, you don't want to grab it underneath its gill plate and hold it up and down. What will happen is you'll stretch out its vertebrae, you can stretch out the stomach lining and do a lot of damage to that fish. You always want to support a muskie underneath its belly when you pull them out of the net. So what I do is when I'm fishing is, let me just get this off here. When we get a fish on and we land a fish, I have a big net. It's a Beckman, and it's probably, she's 4 feet deep anyways. It's got a real big hoop on it. I land the fish. I don't lift the fish up out of the water at all with that. What I do is I keep the net in the water. I net the fish. I leave the net in the water. Sometimes when I'm musky fishing, I'll have rod holders on my boat, not necessarily for trolling, but I actually put my net in it. Especially if I have customers out, I can put that net there. Nobody has to hold on to the net. The fish isn't going anywhere. It's like a big live well. So now what I'm going to do is, people in the boat, especially if they're not experienced musky fishermen, they're going to be pretty excited. It gives them a chance to calm down, get their wits about them, get their camera out, get some gloves on if they want to hold the fish with the gloves. I'll get in there with a pair of needle-nose pliers, best case scenario, wiggle those hooks, get them out. If the hooks are buried really deep, if I can't get them with pliers, I'll go in there and I'll cut them out with my hook cutters. It takes a long time to grow a muskie to a trophy size. The last thing, and we spend a lot of time, effort, and energy chasing these fish. The last thing we want to do is go in there and start ripping hooks out and damaging these fish, especially if it's around their gills and whatnot. You'll notice quite often, once you cut a hook and you release that pressure, the little piece that's in there will pop out. If it doesn't pop out, it's best to get it out. If you can't, don't worry about it. You're better off just cutting those hooks and not ripping and tearing around the face there, and especially around the gills. I'll leave the fish in the net, get the hooks out, leave the fish in the water for a minute. It gives him a chance to recuperate. He can still breathe and everything in the water. And then I'll ask my people in the boat if they want to hold the fish with their left or the right hand. I'll pull it out of the net accordingly. What I'll do is get one hand underneath the gill plate. And it's a good idea if you have a small pair of leather gloves to wear there, because the fish starts to thrash, you can catch your knuckles up pretty bad on there. I've done it lots of times. I'm a bit of a slow learner. I prefer to handle them without gloves, but I'm telling you, you really should have a pair of leather gloves on for that. Get your hand in there, give it a good firm grip, and when you're pulling him out, slide your other hand underneath his belly. So when you're pulling him out of the net, you got him horizontal. It's a lot better for the fish that way. Couple quick photos and you get them right back in the water. So this next slide, you see I got one of my favorite fishing partners there, my trusty dog. See how I got the one hand underneath the gill plate there, and this hand here right underneath the belly. Then there you go. It's not a real big fish, but he's supported vertically. Pardon me. He's supported horizontally there, and you're not damaging the back and stretching out the stomach lining at all. Let's go back here. Does anybody have any questions?
I don't see any yet right now, Brent.
Alrighty.
But yeah, at any point, for those who missed it, if you have any questions, just use the chat function there, and you can type it in there, and we'll answer it at any time. So what do you got next, Brent?
Well, I got a couple pictures here. One is what I want to talk about is I've always been a guy that wants to get up early in the morning and get that morning bite. We do that a lot with salmon fishing. What time do you get up when you're going salmon fishing, Mark?
I want to be on the water, and my line's in the water just before that sun cracks the horizon.
Exactly. And I'm sure Shane's the same way, I know. And I really enjoy getting out salmon fishing early in the morning. I used to get up early to go musky fishing all the time. And a lot of my guide trips up north, I'd start at 7 o'clock or whatever even. Now I'm really starting to look at it the other way. I've really started to notice over the years, listening to other people talk and whatnot, that evening bite is way, way better than the morning bite when you're musky fishing. So if you're not a morning person, don't worry about it. It's all good when you're musky fishing. Sleep in, get a little bit of a later start in your day. But one of the best times for musky fishing is when that sun starts to go down. So what I used to do was we had a trailer up in the Kawarthas, excuse me, and I'd get up early. I'd be musky fishing all day with clients, whatever. I'd come back, have dinner, and then my wife and I would go walleye fishing. Walleye fishing is good in the morning. It's good in the, you can catch walleye. Actually, you can do really well walleye fishing during the day as well, and you do really, really well in the evening, of course. But what I was doing was I was actually missing out on a really, really good musky bite in the evening. And I've kind of learned this over the years, as I said, through time on the water, talking to other people, learning from other people, listening to what people have to say. I'm just going to pull a picture up here. There's a fish that we got on the Ottawa River a few weeks ago, which will be on the show. And fishing with John Anderson, he kept saying about this one favorite spot of his, we got to go there at sunset. We got to go there at sunset. It's almost like we were waiting for sunset. We wanted to catch 2 fish with John. We talked about catching 2 fish on the second day. We got that one about 3:30, 3:45. And then it's like, it was pretty eerie because John just had this confidence. I don't know if what it was, but that when that sun's going down, he catches a lot of fish as the sun's going down or just after dark. I don't know if I've seen any musky shows on TV where they've actually physically got it on film. I've seen lots of pictures of fish after dark, but we've actually got it on film. So we've actually caught this on film, this fish on film with the sun down, which is pretty cool. But we're also very fortunate because the camera guy had lots of lights in the boat to light things up, made it a lot easier netting a fish. But if you are going to fish after night, when it gets dark, I would really suggest that you have headlights on, you have lights in the boat, because the last thing you want to be doing is messing with a fish in the dark, in the net, that's got, teeth like a muskie, and it's got these big 5, 6, 7 out treble hooks in his mouth.
Got a couple questions that just came in, Brent.
Yes.
So first one, I think I can answer. We just had asking about what that app was. It's called Fishing and Hunting Solar Lunar Phases.
Yeah, fishing and hunting sonars. I hate that word. I can never say it right.
So if you
Lunar app.
Yeah, if you punch it into your app store, it'll be up there on the top of the searches there, Jeff, who asked that question.
Yeah, and it's got a little, it's kind of an aqua blue with the fish on it, and yeah, Fishing and Hunting Solar app.
Forget it. Next question we had is talking about the Niagara River. If you were to pick one lure to use, you're fishing around the Frenchman Creek area, what would it be?
I have a love-hate relationship with the Niagara. I'll love it for a day or two, then I'll hate it for 3 weeks. But you're talking like in this time of year, or?
We'll wait and see. It was John there who asked the question.
So fishing in Niagara, I really feel those fish for the most part are bottom orientated. I know I fished the upper and lower a little bit, or I fished the upper a lot years ago in particular, and it was all trolling game then. Now guys are drifting a lot with tubes and big. I like to drift I'll drift out there with the current and drift a big swim bait like this, like the Susie Sucker here. There's or Curly Sue, I should say.
Yeah.
And the only I've jigged bindy baits out there and caught fish as well. The nice thing about the big tubes, though, you don't have the hooks on the bottom to get caught on the rocks, because you want to. I really think you want to be close to bottom out there. Those fish are bottom orientated.
Yeah, that question was related to the fall.
To the fall, yeah. So in the fall, keeping your motor. I like to try to keep the boat either sideways or, depending how many people are in the boat, sometimes I'll keep it going into the current, but I want to be controlled in my drift. And either real big tubes or swim baits like that, The tubes are a little bit more forgiving. They will get caught in between the rocks, but you don't have those treble hooks at the bottom. I've jigged binding baits out there too. I don't really see a lot of guys with the big swim baits out there. A lot of guys will jig tubes out there. I like the swim baits. I like that curly tail on the back. I think that throws off a lot of action and is very intriguing to the fish. So if I'm out there, season closes on Tuesday. If I get out there between now and Tuesday, that's probably what I'm going to be doing. I might do a little bit of trolling too, hitting bottom with big 10-inch believers, stuff like that. Some of the homemade baits that they have out there with the big lips. I want my baits close to bottom. I know those Johnson baits, they're a real nice bait for trolling out there as well. Get those nice and deep. I'm going to be between 15 and 25 feet of water there for the most part. More or less 20 to 25, but when the sun's going down or just coming up, it might move in a little bit shallower. And it's going to depend on how clear the water is too. If the water's muddy, we've had a lot of wind and it's muddy, then you can go a little shallower as well. But if it's clear, I'm going to be deeper, that's for sure.
Okay, thanks. We had another question, and it's a little vague, Rob. We might need a little more clarification. How deep are you trolling for muskie? So, Rob, I think we would need to know kind of more what's the location and the time of year you'd be.
Well, I can go over a few different things for that. In the Kawartha Lakes, for example, when I do troll in June, I actually will troll when we're having lunch or whatever. I actually don't mind trolling. I'm a caster. More at least 90% of my muskie is casting. But if I am trolling in the Kawarthas, I'll troll. I don't have any here in front of me. You can troll blades like this. You can troll the big safety pin spinner baits, so they're like the bass ones, but they're musky size, like they're on steroids. And I'll troll those in right over top of the weeds. In June, where you might have weeds up to the surface in July, in June when they're down a few feet yet, I'll troll right over top of those 20 feet, between 20 and 50 feet of line out, depending on my baits. If I got 3 rods, I'm going to vary it. 2 rods, I'm going to vary it. And we've caught a lot of fish like that. As the weeds get up to the surface, I'm going to troll the edges more. So if I'm going along a weed bed, if I'm in the weed beds off to my left, I'm going to run a shallower bait there, and a little bit deeper bait on the outside. And I'm going to watch my chart, my Navionics, and I'm going to watch the contours and try to keep that boat in probably 12 to 15 feet of water. And it's amazing how on those weed beds, how the difference between when you got that shallow bait right on the weeds, how much deeper it is on the outside of it. So you can run a bit of a deeper bait. You kind of cover two areas at the same time that way. And then again, once you get into August and whatnot, August, September, maybe even into October, if I'm doing any trolling, I'm going to be pulling big baits like I said, like a 10-inch believer, maybe a big Cisco Kid, and I'm going to be pounding rocks coming out of like 30 feet, 40 feet up into the 20-foot humps and stuff like that, and banging bottom around points, stuff like that. And again, don't forget, when you're trolling, I'm always using, if I'm short line trolling, I'm not so worried about the longer leaders, but if anywhere where I'm trolling deeper water, where I'm coming up with rocks and shoals and that, I'm definitely going to be using that 48-inch leader. Now, the only thing with the 40, I don't, do you guys have any longer leaders at the shop, Mark? Or are they mostly casting ones?
We're currently out, but we will have a good stock when the season resumes in June. So we are making our own out of different lengths, be it a wire and floral, and there'll be other manufacturers' leaders as well.
Right. Alrighty. Yeah, because sometimes the trolling leaders are a little harder to find than the casting leaders.
Okay. Checking. So I might be able to answer this. We got a question. Will the baits be able to dive the right depths for the Niagara River and maybe perhaps other situations by themselves, or do you need to use downriggers or any other diving aids? So I'm going to think probably most cases no.
Yeah, for musky fishing, actually, it's funny you said that, because I was talking about with a friend of mine about putting one of these on a downrigger in the Niagara River. You'd almost have to be on the rig and just drifting with the current just to keep it right close to bottom. but then you'd have to be on the rigger the whole time because it's a great way to keep your a controlled depth. But the way that river is, you're going to be up and down so much, you're going to have to be right on that rigger paying attention to your depth sounder the whole time. No, the musky baits we have out nowadays, there's no need to, you don't need to run lead in front of them for the most part, or divers. I do have some big musky spoons that are about 7-8 inches long, maybe 9 inches, and they're quite wide. You could run those off a diver if you wanted to troll something like that. But the big lip baits that we have now, you can get those down. You can get them down 25 feet easily, quite easily for trolling. And again, when I'm trolling, I'm using braided line all the time, musky fishing. Years ago on the Niagara River, back in the 90s, we used to use a steel line. Excuse me. In the river itself, we'd use a single strand. And then out in the Buffalo Harbor, we'd use a 7-strand. So Buffalo Harbor, you're not banging into rocks and all that kind of stuff. So we could use a 7-strand. But in the river where you're hitting rocks all the time and it's the structure's up and down quite a bit, then we go with the single wire, Minnow wire.
It's funny you mentioned spoons. I seem to recall hearing years ago of a guide in the Kawarthas casting oversized spoons and doing fairly well with them.
Yeah, one of my first, geez, I wonder if I could find that here. One of my first big muskies I caught in the Kawarthas was actually on a spoon. I'm going to see if, and actually we're going to talk, let me see if I can find that here. I've actually, musky pictures. I'm going to see if I can load that on here.
Okay.
Because it's quite an interesting picture for a number of reasons. So it'll just take me a second to find it here. Does anybody, I can answer another question while I'm looking for it, of course.
I don't see any yet, but we'll wait. If anyone has any questions to this point, by all means, use the chat function and send them to us.
Yeah, okay, I'm in the right folder here on my computer. I just got to find it. Oh, there it is. It didn't take that long at all. Okay. Oh, one sec. There we go.
Oh, wow. Who's that guy?
So what's that?
Who's that guy?
Yeah, no, the hair is still the same in the back, a little thinner on the top now. So that fish there was actually caught on like a big Eppinger spoon, like it was a green crackle frog. I remember that. But so that was a 44-inch fish, and the first I would consider a big fish that I caught. You know, the way guys hold the fish nowadays, you make that look a lot bigger in the picture, of course. But
Yeah.
But see what I got in my my right hand there, the gaff.
Yeah. So
years ago, you can see I got on there a Muskie's Canada jacket, right? Years ago, the preferred method of Muskie's Canada to land a muskie at boat side was using a gaff. They didn't like the idea of using nets. Nets have came a long ways and are a great tool now. But back then, you put a fish in a net and he'd flip around and the hooks would get caught in the net and it would just make a real big mess. And they were hard on the fish's fins. More like a salmon net, I guess, like, you know, some of our bigger salmon nets. Guys are using nets like that. And they were very hard on the fish. So what we would do is we make up these gaffs and at boat side, you get the gaff in there and pierce in the lower through the membrane of the lower jaw. And yeah, fortunately we don't do that anymore. I don't know if it hurt the fish or not, but the nets that we have nowadays are a lot better. They got smaller, you know, they're a heavier net. They're not those nylon nets anymore. They're a lot heavier, and the fish are a lot safer in the nets nowadays than they were then.
What about cradles? Are guys still using those?
Well, the funny thing about a cradle is, one, you need 2 people for it. Oh, what's going on there? Uh-oh, I hit the wrong button. Yeah, the only problem with cradles is that you need 2 people for one.
Yeah.
And then also, oh, there we go. Also, in order to land a fish by cradle, so your buddy's got a fish on. He's got these great big treble hooks stuck in that fish's face. He's leading that fish into you. You're reaching out with two arms like this with your cradle, leaning over the side of the boat as he brings that fish in towards your face and your hands and your arms. I don't know if it's happened to anybody, but if that fish does start all of a sudden make a leap or a jump or charges forward, well, I'd you know, I'm not saying I'm the best looking guy out there, but I don't want to ruin all this, you know. So yeah, there's a lot of a cradle could be a good tool, but I don't like the idea of reaching out like that and having that fish being led into my face or my hands there. So I think the best thing nowadays, a net you can use by yourself. It's great when you have somebody with you. I've netted muskie by myself with a net. It works out pretty good. So yeah, I think if you're going to be serious or if you're going to go be out muskie fishing, especially if you're getting serious into muskie fishing, get yourself some good release tools. Make sure you have a good pair of cutters, hook cutters, needle nose pliers, a net, and enjoy it and have fun with it.
Yeah. What about we get many people in the shop, Brent, who head up to like the French River and Georgian Bay, you know, for vacation. You got any advice for equipment, for setups for them going there? Like people only have a week to fish, and maybe they're fishing water that maybe they return to each year, or maybe it's new water to them.
Yeah, so if you're fishing new water, here's one thing we used to do years ago in the Kawarthas before we really had depth sounders. We would start trolling. And when we came upon a weed bed, we'd start casting it. And then we'd fish that weed bed. We kind of make mental notes. We'd look at the shore, look at a cottage, and then we'd look maybe two different directions to see if we can get kind of some coordinates for that place, make a mental note, and we start trolling again. Come into another weed bed or whatever, then we start casting it. So if you're going away for a weekend, if you get up there on Friday or Thursday night, maybe go for a boat ride without thinking about fishing, without taking rods with you. Well, take rods by all means, and cover some water. Go into the little bays or whatever, go along the shorelines, go for a boat ride and start marking spots where you want to fish the next day. Of course, nowadays we have a lot of maps and everything else for like the Kawartha Lakes, but a lot of those places like the French River, they don't have maps for them. So the best thing to do, I would say, is if you're going up there for a weekend or for a few days, go out for a few hours without planning on fishing and looking for spots that you want to fish. Look for those big weed beds, those rock points, stuff like that. Use your electronics. Use your eyes, look in the water, look around. And pay attention to your electronics, because it's amazing. You put your side vision on too on your electronics.
Okay, good.
So that thing's pretty hard. That's one thing that's very hard to do though. If you're going away, is to go out and not fish and just look for spots. Look where you want to fish, because you get up there, you're excited to get up there, whether you're there for a week or a weekend or whatever. You want to get out fishing. You know what? You've been at work all week. You can't wait to get out fishing, and now you're going for a boat ride instead of fishing. It's hard to do, but it can pay big dividends in the long run.
Sure.
Kind of set yourself up with a milk run for the next day. If you can go out for a couple hours and drive around and say, okay, there's a spot. I'm gonna, put a spot on your GPS. You're gonna come to that spot, drive down. If you can find 5 or 6 spots or 8 spots, there's a whole day's of fishing that you can that you're for the next day. If you go out fishing that first night, if you don't go looking around, the next day you're going to be looking for spots instead of fishing all day. So yeah, anybody else have any questions there?
I don't see any yet.
All right.
Here's one. Have you ever fished Lake Nas Bonson?
No, I haven't. I've heard lots of things about it, but I've never fished there myself.
Okay.
I know there's some big fish up there.
Mm-hmm. Well, nothing else currently yet. What about so St. Clair obviously has been trending well. It's been a popular destination for many to go to. It certainly has a very healthy population of numbers of fish, and a good chance at a high 40s or maybe even a 50-inch fish for people. What kind of advice could you maybe give for those who maybe have gone a couple times with limited success, or maybe they're planning to go next year?
I've never fished up on Lake St. Clair, if you can believe that. But well, that didn't work out there. If you go into a body of water that you're not familiar with, if there's nothing wrong with hiring a guide for it. What's a guide cost you for a day? $400 or $500 or whatever for a trip up there. I'm not sure what guys are charging up there, but if you're going up with another buddy, you want to learn a body of water, that's a great way to learn it, especially a place like St. Clair, or you're going to see what kind of bait to use, whether you're casting or trolling. You're going to find areas that you want to fish, stuff like that. So if you're going to a new body of water, especially if you're going for a week or whatever, don't hesitate to hire a guide for a day just to learn about the water. You don't have to actually look for spots with them, but find out what kind of spots to look for, what you should be looking for, what kind of structure, what kind of forage they're feeding on, stuff like that.
Okay.
And if you hire a guide for a day, pick his brain. He's been on those bodies of waters for years. Ask him questions.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly is all about shortening the learning curve.
Absolutely. Well, yourself, Mark, out in Lake Ontario, right? Things change every year.
Yep.
And I'm sure yourself and Shane and that, what happens first in April? All of a sudden, guys you haven't heard from all winter, right? All of a sudden your phone lights up.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Hey, I see you're out in the lake there last week. What's going on?
Yeah. We just had a question come in. Any knowledge or recommendations on the Pickerel River system?
I have fished up there a few times. One thing I noticed fishing on the Pickerel River, you got a lot of rock walls on there. There's channels with rock walls, and we've actually caught fish. Like I said, morning seems to be a little bit less activity when musky fishing compared to the evenings. But there's rock walls that come right down. There's channels in there. I know twice fishing up on the Pickerel River there, we've got fish right up against a rock wall first thing in the morning, where the sun's actually beating down on that rock wall. So that may only be maybe a degree temperature change or whatever. I think it's actually that water is probably just a tiny, tiny little bit warmer. Now, this was in October when I fished there. I fished there a few times in October. But with that sun beating down on those rocks, that sunny side of the rock, first thing in the morning, we've caught fish up on those rock walls first thing in the morning. Let's turn that volume down on my phone. It's dinging. So yeah, that's one thing.
What were you using then?
That was on a big jerk bait.
Okay.
Right up against the wall, 1 or 2 pumps and the fish were on. We got fish on like that 2 days in a row in the first thing in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And on the Pickerel River, there's a waterfall. I can't remember what it's called, but there's a big waterfall that comes in there. A lot of current. We've also caught fish right in that current there. Muskies love current. Whether you're fishing like Kawartha Lakes or anywhere, you got to remember muskies love current. They're originally a river fish. So if you're fishing places like the Kawartha Lakes where you don't physically see the current, if you have any islands where you got wind pounding through, that's creating current. Mm-hmm. And that does a few things. One, it gets the bait fish moving in there. If you got rock points in there and you got wind blowing across it, you got current. The wind's creating current. Muskies love current. When you got wind pounding across something like that, crayfish and minnows and that get stirred up, which bring in smallmouth and rock bass and stuff like that to feed on those. And then the muskie are right in behind them feeding. Mm-hmm. So no matter where you're fishing, you get current areas. I know on the French River as well, there's one place where there's a lot of current coming in where we've contacted fish.
Mm-hmm.
So
whether the narrows and the causeways too in the Kawartha system, there's current there.
Yeah, you got current and wind. Wind creates current, especially around islands. So, or even over rock points. You get that wind pushing through, And then all of a sudden the water gets shallower and it creates current because the water's getting pushed over top of it.
Mhm. What about the Port Severn area? Any tips for that?
I've only fished up there a little bit. So yeah, I can't really, I know over at Midland there, yeah, I know guys have got some, friends of mine have got some good fish over at Midland and whatnot, but I haven't really fished up there enough to, if you're in there in the summertime, you're fishing weed beds, throw a lot of blades, throw jerk bait, kind of the same type of stuff you could do in the Kawarthas. But yeah, I haven't really fished up there a lot to give any legitimate advice on.
Okay. Is there somewhere? I know you hit the Ottawa River this fall. What's next on a destination for you if you could make it work? Somewhere maybe you haven't been.
Oh, I can't wait to go back up to the Ottawa River. It's such a cool place. And, as I said, a friend of mine, John Anderson, owns the Ottawa River Musky factory up there. And if anybody's looking for a destination to fish, it's just, they are on a big fish pattern. I don't think there's a better musky guide in that area than John. And he's got a team of guides that work for him. And it's just such a cool place. It's such an interesting area to fish, and their fish are thick there. They're Kawarthas, the fish in the Kawarthas are thicker now than they were 20 years ago. You used to get some real snakes in there, but the Ottawa River, they got a couple different strains of muskie in there, and they are thick. They're big, thick fish. You get spotted fish in there. You get barred fish. You get blonde-looking fish. You get a real variety of them. But one thing I do need to do is I really do need to get to make the effort and get down to Lake St. Clair. I've never fished there for some reason. I plan on it every year, and it just never. We were going to go there this year, and we ended up with a lot of wind, so we didn't go down. And then it's always something seems to get in the way. Probably St. Clair just to check it out, but it's not. Yeah, but if yeah, probably my favorite place that I fished in the last few years has got to be the Ottawa River. And that could be the company guys I'm fishing with down there too, which are just, makes it real special too.
Here's an interesting question. Do you recommend pouring carbonated drinks on bleeding fish?
Well, you know what? That's a very interesting question. And it was actually, I know bass guys used to do that. The bass guys used to would do that with bleeding fish, pour Mountain Dew or whatever on them. I know they did some scientific stuff on them and whatnot, but I don't know. I don't know. I know, I'm not sure. I haven't done it myself. It'd be really interesting. I know guys that have done it. It'd be really interesting to have a tagging study on some of those fish. Though if you have a bleeding fish, you don't want to be taking them out and putting a tag in them and all that kind of stuff. You want to get them back in the water as quick as possible, obviously. And it'd be really interesting to see if the results of a tagging system with if you get some recaptures.
Mm-hmm.
I've read a little bit about it. I've read some of the stuff on it, the articles on it, but I don't have any firsthand experience with it. So, yeah, but if fish don't have a lot of blood in them, if they're bleeding a lot, and if you can stop the bleeding, that'd be good, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Just a question. Someone was wondering, what part of the Ottawa River were you on? Like the upper by Pembroke, or was it down by Arnprior?
Plantagenet.
Okay.
I think it's Tweedwell and what's the other spot there? Wendover. Kind of in that area there. But if you're thinking of heading down there, if you place 1967 is a place that we stayed at there, and it's Plantagenet, and you're like 5 minutes from the river.
Did you have any other material, Brent?
I think that pretty much covers what we're going to talk about. But I know we were talking earlier, Mark, about if you're just getting into musky fishing, one combo that I use is the Max Toro combo. It's I think retail. I think if I'm not mistaken, now don't quote me on this because every year prices change, but the retail on the rod and reel combo is like $250. The reel itself was $209 last year, anyways. And I said prices change, so don't quote me on that. But it's a heavy action musky rod, but it's very lightweight, and I love throwing jerk baits in the Kawarthas with it. It's just such a. I wish they made it in a couple different sizes as well, but it's one of my favorite rods. I wish they make them a little bit longer, but the one I use in the Kawarthas quite often is it's 7.6. Guys have got into using a lot of longer musky rods over the years. About 8.6 is what I like to throw. This one's 7.6. If you're just getting into musky fishing, especially if you don't know if you're going to like it or not, these Max Toro combos, and I think we talked about those earlier, Mark. For $250 to get a rod and reel combo, you can't beat it. As I said, I've used it this year numerous times. The last few years I've been using it actually, especially in the Kawartha Lakes throwing jerk baits, and it does a real nice job.
So maybe Brent, years ago, these here, the ambassadors and the round style reel were pretty popular. And, nowadays a lot of people are using the lower profile ones. Like, what's your take on that?
The lower profile, my first musky reel was an Abu Garcia 6500, and that was, if you had one of those, that was the rod. That was the reel to have for a musky guy back in the day. That and the Abu Garcia 7000. Especially if you're into big trolling stuff, you go with the 7000. But the 6500 was the reel. Nowadays, reels I like, I have on a couple other rods are the Toro Beast. They got a great drag on them. They're a low profile reel, a little easier on your hand. And especially if you don't have really big hands, some of those round reels are a little harder to hold. I always palm the reel. I have the reel whenever I'm retrieving a bait, I'll grab the reel like by the palm here. It's kind of upside down, but I don't know if I have enough room to turn it this way. Not really. So yeah, I have the reel in my palm, right? So that lower profile is a little easier. Well, I have fair size hands, so it's not a big deal for me, but especially ladies or guys with smaller hands or whatever, then those low profile reels are a lot nicer. Yeah, the drop down gears on them as well. They've got bigger gears in them now. The Max Toro combo, the Toro Beast, they're a great reel. They come in different 2 different gear ratios as well. I said that high speed, I'm going to be throwing that for when I'm picking up line when I'm working a jerk bait, and the lower gears for the when I'm pulling blades and whatnot. And the nice thing is you can crank those jigs down. When I'm musky fishing, I don't like to be able to pull line off my reel very easily. I have them cranked right down. When I set that hook, I don't want anything happening. I don't want my line stretching, so I'm going to use braid. I don't want line coming off my reel. I want, when I pull back to set that hook, the only thing I want is my rod to bend. I want everything else to be solid. So I like a reel like that. I think you can get down 30 pounds of drag on a straight pull on the Toro Beast, the Revo Toro Beast. And it's very important being able to crank those drags down. And and you know what, a fish will still pull a little bit of drag every now and then, especially when it gets close to the boat. You don't have it, you have a stiff rod, you have no stretch in your line. Something's got to give a bit, even at that 30-pound crank down. A big fish will still at times take a little bit of line off your rod, especially in the summertime when they're really active. When I'm talking a little bit of line, I'm not talking like around like a salmon. I'm talking, like maybe 5-10 feet.
Okay, well, does anyone have any questions left? If not, maybe we'll wrap up, and we'll certainly, we know you're pretty accessible, Brent. If maybe people, they're going to watch this later, if they weren't able to join in tonight, you're pretty accessible through your social media channels to chat and follow up with people if they got any other questions. And of course, we're always here at the store to people want to see things or want to know more about getting set up for Musky.
Yeah, by all means, they can reach out to me anytime, whether it's the website. You can get hold of me at fishenvy.ca, fishenvy@live.ca for the email, 905-961-3474. Give me a call, send me a text, reach out on social media. Yeah, I'd love to. If you get any questions, feel free to give me a call. I don't mind talking musky at all, or any type of fishing, really.
Here's a good question. What type of knot do you typically use when you're tying to terminal tackle?
Just a shoot.
The polymer?
Polymer usually.
No, that's what we suggest too, especially with the braided line. So there's no slippage at all.
And don't worry about leaving a 3/4 of an inch tag on there. Like that way, if you did have any slip, don't worry about leaving a little tag on there. It's not a big deal. Musky's not coming in and looking at your bait like if you're jigging for walleye or whatever, they might come in and come up on your bait slowly and take a real good look at it. A musky will follow a bait, but he's not looking. You got a big steel leader on the front there. You got this big steel leader on there. If you watch a musky bait in the water, you can see that leader. If you film any musky baits underwater, you can see that leader. You got 5, 6, 7 hooks underneath. How unnatural does the hooks on a bait look?
Yeah.
That little tag sticking out there, just in case there's a little slippage, isn't going to bother anything at all.
Well,
and if you are worried about that little tag there slipping, whatever, you can always take a lighter to that little tag end, and it puts a little bit of a bead on it.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, I always leave a little bit of a tag coming off there, just in case there is any slippage on it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for taking the time, Brent, tonight to do this.
My pleasure.
A few tips, and I'm sure everyone learned something from it. And, we're going to be doing some more of these in the new year. Some salmon and walleye and trout ones, and maybe even a Lake Erie Niagara River bass one. So thanks, Brent. Merry Christmas to you and Heather if we don't see you between now and the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me out, and look forward to seeing you at the store shortly, and appreciate everybody coming out and talking fishing tonight. It's been great. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yeah,
hope everybody stays healthy.
And to Shane, who's been there helping us with some technical. Thanks, Shane, and we'll talk to you later, bud.
And if anybody still has their boat out, I don't know what the weather's going to be like this weekend. I haven't really looked or whatever, but there was guys out in Lake Ontario today salmon fishing and did real well on the cohos. I don't know if they're out deep or shallow or whatever, but I probably will find out in the next day and see if I can't take advantage of that myself.
Excellent. Yeah, that's the beauty of living down here in Niagara. We always have some good windows of opportunity to fish in our boats year round.
And if you do go out there, make sure you wear, if you don't have a flotation suit, make sure you at least wear a life jacket, especially this time of year.
Absolutely.
That water's cold.
Well, we'll sign off now, and then we'll leave a little spot at the end of the video, our video here. Of maybe Brent will add some video clips too that he wasn't able to include as well. So thanks, Brent. Take care. See you later.
Thanks, everybody.